Alright, so this is the wrap-up screencast. I'm going to try to zip through this one fairly quickly. What I want us to remember right now is, remember we're coming out of the Enlightenment. Right, so before the Enlightenment, real bad Civil War, it was awful. Some of the stuff that we have now that we completely take for granted, we don't really think about it anymore because it's everywhere. So like a functional sewage system, for example, on the kind of scale that we need it, comes out of this. Modern financial markets, when the glue for the Enlightenment comes unraveled, people start taking notice all of a sudden, but by and large, people take it for granted. So usually, I mean, this is just my opinion, but everybody thinks, everybody likes to down the bureaucrats and all that sort of stuff. Remember back from Rome way back in the day. In terms of where we are now, a lot of that stuff comes from the period preceding this, but it's kind of boring. It's gunky. It usually involves a lot of paperwork, specialized knowledge, and so on. I mean, just a practical example. Everybody knows how screwed up 75 is when you get north of Sam's Club. Was because we didn't really exercise the principles of the Enlightenment. That in this case, the civil engineers or whoever, maybe people paying for it from the state, didn't really survey correctly anyway. The water, if you look at the bottom of that hill, it just moves all over the place under the highway. So nobody ever built a chute for the water to go through, and so all the holes, right, that are constantly getting filled. This is the kind of thing the Romans were executing way back in the day, but really apply it wherever in society right now. So it's there, we just didn't execute it correctly. In Romanticism, there's a huge reaction kind of against this. Is this sort of thirst for order. Right? So now what's happening with a lot of these Romantic artists, not all of them, is the opposite. If with rising industrialization, people move into the cities, there's not a whole lot of regulations on factories. Children are working in these factories. Time is starting to function. The whistles from factories bringing everybody in. Get away from it all, right? So this is just one I'm talking about. And remember, anytime I paint with a broad brush, a lot of this will break down in individual cases. But what Romanticism tends to idealize, one of the things that I did, nature. Right? So this is great. If I'm in this heavily, industrial society, or at least it's moving in that direction, wouldn't it be the thing that I want most? Farm. Right. Okay, farm, there'd be this nice little buggy driving along, and I could sip tea or whatever and watch it. And so I'm not thinking of if I'm in London proper or Paris proper. I'm not thinking about bugs. I'm not thinking about like all the cow crap I'm going to have to scoop and get into the field to fertilize it. All that, something got out of the fence in the morning. I have to spend half of the morning. Some of you all are on farms, right? You know this sort of stuff. I'm not really thinking about that part of it. What I'm sort of more worried about my individual feelings, right? Especially becoming closer to nature. I'm also concerned with the power of nature. Oh no! And now let's see if the book timed out for good here. All right, so we're going to be okay. So I'm also concerned with, if I'm JMW Turner, the power of nature. Increasingly just power in and of itself, and here the ship we're starting to lose focus of the ship and only be concerned with the power of the storm. You can see the kind of beginnings of Impressionism that we're going to zip through in a second. So disorder. We get to one of the better ones along the way here is Tintern Abbey. Right, this watercolor here. This is great. Wordsworth wrote a poem about this. This is the watercolor about it. Abbey. This is where monks, man-made institutions to worship, or at least for the monks to reside in. It now nature's taking it back. The real sort of God power in nature is taking back the man-made institution, the creation. This is great for romantics, and indeed for Wordsworth. Not that this is Turner here, but in the poem that Wordsworth has a real big, famous flagship poem for Romanticism called Tintern Abbey. And this is what he's talking about. You go back to nature to get rejuvenated, and here it starts. Okay, so we get out of this era, and we're going to go to Manet, right? So now there's a reaction against Romanticism. What's the reaction against it? Realism. I don't want to idealize things anymore. Painters and artists at the time didn't. We just want to talk about how it is. And so, how is it? This is what's actually going on in society. Men are coming to prostitutes for their favor. So this is not a goddess anymore. It's an actual woman, scandalous. This about caused a riot at the time. So you just don't paint naked women, especially, right? Unless you call them goddesses. That's the rule. You don't break the rule. And so, I mean, we of course see this as silly, but they're at the time where all this is just coming on. So one of the things that we're from here, notice how it's close to this one, right? So he's doing this on purpose, right? It's okay, Venus, right? But not a prostitute. That's not good. So we're going to get past this period a little bit, and there are several that the textbook did not publish on, say, war, for instance. We're going to portray war, how it is. Very unpleasant, very in your face. As a few of you pointed out in your responses, increasingly what's happening is we have this rise of the camera. Right? So now there is competition for painters, and they got to do something different than how it is starts becoming photographs. Right? And also the patronage I haven't talked a whole lot about most of the course. Painters are not getting as much money for painting portraits of famous people and their families, so that the people could hang them in their houses, and it's kind of a prestige thing, or showing off their wealth. So it's the same thing they did then. It's like I like to make fun of people around here. When you shoot a big buck or something, you got to mount it on the wall, right? Look what I'm a big hunter and all that sort of stuff. Even though it's kind of ridiculous in Texas, because mostly the deer just come to something where you just have to be able to know how to hit a target, right? It's no real actual hunting involved, but that doesn't diminish the kind of display that comes with all that. Okay, so Impressionists, we need to do something different than how it is. Well, we're going to go back to how do you perceive things? Color and light is what we're going to focus on as a group. So now we're to Monet, not Manet. It's confusing because they're right on top of each other. And what Monet is doing here, this is the one, it was somebody derided the painting. So it's just like it's an impression. Well, that's the whole point. So they took the name, and there's very few brush strokes with all this. The painting is thicker. It's in these tubes now, by the way, one of the technological innovations that helped the Impressionists out. Kind of like toothpaste tubes. And probably y'all aren't old enough to remember, they used to be aluminum before they were plastic. So the same sort of thing here. They had these metal tubes, but they didn't have to mix paints as much anymore. And they're a lot more lead-based, and they could carry them, which brings out bright colors. And they could carry them around wherever. It made them a lot more mobile, right? So is reality, but if you kind of look at it for a second and then close your eyes and turn away, that impression, that's what they wanted to do, right? Lots of color, lots of, like, people down Impressionism because there's tends to be not a whole lot of substance, but that's not true in all cases. Okay, so after we get out of, and you see one of the, that's how they would paint a building. But they're doing it in a very new way, right? A cathedral in this case. Post-Impressionism, we're not going to go too deep, and this is where some of the real bigs are. So Van Gogh and Cézanne, some of the most sought-after paintings of all time. Van Gogh, besides doing all the innovative stuff, he's especially valuable because he had a real tragic life y'all have heard of, about cutting off his ear. He was kind of nutty to start out with, and I don't have time to get into some of the personal details, but the long story short is he was probably getting lead poisoning on top of an already kind of unstable psyche, as it were, unstable mind. And before he cracked up and he got committed, is the long story short. And so when he was in the play, he killed himself, but he didn't do, like a lot of things in his life, he didn't do that very well either as far as his personal life. And he essentially gut shot himself. So it took him a long time to die. And it was real sad, but at least he got to visit with some of his relatives before he died. Okay, so now, everybody knows Van Gogh, the Starry Night, a lot of his other famous paintings, deep religious themes and all that. At one point, he was training to become a priest. And one of the reasons he is so valuable is because his mother got a lot of his paintings, not all of his paintings, and a good chunk of those that she got, she actually put them out to the trash. She didn't think that they were worth anything. So there have been, not as many as there would have been otherwise with Van Gogh. All right, so we're going to go from Romanticism through Realism, Impressionism, Post. These are painting periods, but really the larger theme is we're moving toward modernism from Romanticism. So before I jump into this, let me stress that Romanticism never really goes away. It's still with us. So everybody has known at some point, let's just say a teenage boy, when he's learning to play guitar, right? And you ask him, are you going to take lessons? It's like, no, man. He kind of beats on his chest. I want to keep it real, like right here, as if I have this innate essence, and either you got it or you don't, right? This is very different than the Enlightenment, how people thought in the Enlightenment, and indeed how people still tend to think about the arts. And trust me, Hollywood does no one any favors for this. So if you want to write fiction, poetry, be a painter, anything in the arts, you have got to bust your butt all the time. Most of your day is very boring. It's not very exciting. This idea about that you have to write down the truths and all that, live a crazy life to write some crazy fiction, absolutely not true. Most writers live very boring lives. They type at their typewriters all day, every day, and keep very little. Maybe in spurts they'll keep a lot, but most of the time, not really. Okay, so we think even in very popular movies such as I call it the Days of Thunder stuff, and if you've ever seen, that's an old Tom Cruise movie. Nicole Kidman was in that one too, and he's a race car driver, right? Well, what do you need to do to drive the race car better? You need to get right with the woman. In some other cases, you can get that woman out of your head or whatever it is. Somehow you need to get right with your inner spirit is the idea of it, right? Think of the Rocky movies and just go out and express it. Or in the case of the Days of Thunder, boom, once you get it, it's in the sense of you get your head together, then you go and you hit that other guy in the end in NASCAR when you're driving around, point your finger at him just like he was doing at you, and then you just pass all the cars, right? This is, of course, ridiculous, right? You never hear them talking about, I'm going to make air pressure adjustments in the right rear here, maybe half a spring over on the other side, and all the details, right? More, and that's how it actually is. It's just a lot of work. Right, it goes into setting up these cars for very, very minor changes will have a great adjustment. But we're not concerned with that. We're concerned with the actual inner state of the race car driver. That's romantic. Right? Probably not true. And I'm not saying that people don't have different talents, but you never hear of Tom Brady taking a few weeks off in the middle of the NFL season. Right? It's just work. And it probably, the part of the problem is that successful artists will often portray themselves like, I just came up with this. It occurred to me. They're buying into this larger idea of romanticism. Okay, so the moderns, when we go through the other periods, we're going to get to the moderns like complexity. It's a weird name because at the time it was modern, as in the sense that we would usually use the word. It's right now. But when it became later on, people called it, the movement became modernism. Now it's an old movement. At the time it was a new movement. The name stuck. So it's a kind of a weird name for us. And it started before the World Wars. But one of the things that happened after the World Wars, people were just devastated, especially in Europe. Okay, so you want to think about just the massive amount of casualties, roads, sewage, all this other stuff I was just talking about from the Enlightenment. I mean, society was becoming unglued. So, for example, and I don't want to diminish this in any sense, but we lost, 3,500 people or somewhere around there anyway in 9/11. And America freaked out. We're still kind of freaking out about 9/11 because we haven't been hit like that since Pearl Harbor. Well, if you think about it, in World War II, just the Russians, not any other group of people, lost 20-something million people, right? It's just staggering for all of that. All right, so at the end of Europe especially is like, well, there must not be a God because God wouldn't allow that. So hence this huge decline that we've seen for religious people in Europe. And what are we going to after that? We tend to start liking, or at least the moderns do, they kind of turn away from the average person and increase with increasing complexity. So we get these we're not to the spaghetti type paintings yet, but where people say, well, my kid could do that. That's abstract expressionism, and that's not entirely true. It's just hard to understand abstract expressionism. But when we get to probably the most famous one here, I'll just go ahead and talk about a little bit. Think of it like this. And by way of getting to this painting, I'm going to just talk about, say, William Faulkner is a writer who does it. It's as if something happened a long time ago in a Faulkner novel. No one can really know, or it's never said, what this awful thing is. So people will talk about it, but you can't really rely on the narrators. Some of them have things to cover up. Some of them just don't know, but they want you to think that they know. They're unreliable narrators. So you'll have, say, 10, less or more, different narrators talking about what happened in a different time period, and you can never really know for sure though. So you can talk about it endlessly and speculate. This complexity is desired. And here, let's say, one of the things that we could do is we can look at what would be 3, 4, 5 women, but we don't want to do that now. We're going to increasingly complicate. Give them angular bodies to kind of suggest masculine features. Then we're going to turn their heads around in this case and also make it an African mask. Going to keep the bowl of fruit to keep a kind of classical past to all this, more traditional aspect of it. It's as if, in a sense, he doesn't do it as much in this one, but it's as you remember the old Polaroid type cameras which would shoot out an actual picture. It's as if there was a statue in the room, and boom, you take a picture up close. But then you go to the side and you get further back, take another picture, and then you do that all around the room, so that you can get kind of a 3-dimensional look of it, but then lay them all out in a 2-dimensional table. Well, that is complex, right? And we increasingly value that kind of stuff in modernism after World War II. This is obviously a little bit before all this, but this is where we're going. We have different ideas. So in literature, we'll say, well, we're in the postmodern era. Well, what does that mean? Kind of depends on who you talk with. But also, we stick with complexity, but then some forms will become very simple. It's kind of all over the map. Right? The contemporary period, I think, is what our textbook calls it. What's really going on? Have we even really come up with the accurate name for it? Right? In this era that we're in now, that seems to value different things at different times. When did we actually transfer into the new thing that we're in right now? So different disciplines have different ideas about this. Some of them seem very certain about it. And so I'll leave y'all in the course with something a lot of people don't consider is I'll go with the year that changed a whole lot, but it wasn't realized until probably around now, is 1989. And the reason I'm saying 1989 is that's when the Berlin Wall fell. So the old Soviet Empire diminished. Right? And so now in the world, a lot of stuff changed, but it took a while to really get going. So one of the things I haven't talked about a whole lot this semester is the relationship between corporations and nation states. Right? So whereas before in this time period, corporations had a huge, much closer attachment than now with democracies, because you can't just put an oil platform off the coast of the old Soviet Empire because they will steal it. Right? Same thing with a lot of people a lot of countries that they were friends with and so forth. So whereas before, well, now they can kind of, what are y'all doing for us? Well, before we're also kind of protecting and so forth, and also after that, there's not necessarily the common enemy. So people say now, how are we in politically? It seems like a nastier situation than we were, say, in the decades following World War II. Well, there's no USSR for everybody to unite behind. So if you talk about the different parties, at the end of the day, right, that Reagan had to get along with Tip O'Neill and vice versa, and you go through the different presidents and speakers and Senate leaders and all that sort of stuff. It doesn't seem to be there as much. Now, it could be something else. Maybe it's not. Most students will say 9/11. Maybe it's some other date, but I don't know where we're going. We shall see. And I know I've been killing y'all with these screencasts, so I'm going to go ahead and close it here. I think that's good enough to close out the course, at least for the term for right now. You all message me if you have anything that you see looks long, especially with your grade book, and let's all go into the next term with as much breath as you can get before we start it all over again. All right. So, and by the way, just on a separate note, I'm probably the advisor for most of you. If you have any issues, remember I'm on the main campus, Liberal Arts 106A. Let's try to meet about it and talk about it before you go into the next term, hopefully. If not this term, if you're all set. I'll be around. I may not be in the office. I run around quite a bit. All right.